All right, y'all, welcome to the show. I think it's November 1st, not 100% sure, but let's go with that. It's November 1st, 2022. So got a great show for you guys today. First, let me get my shameless ass plugs out of the way and get some drugs in my system real quick. This show is powered by energy drinks. So everybody like and subscribe on YouTube. Trying to get to 1 million subs. As you all know, been climbing that mountain since like 1972 and struggling to get there. The YouTube algorithm is not kind to your boy. So if you happen to watch the show and enjoy it, you know what? Fuck it. Even if you hate it, just subscribe and get me to 1 million. I'd really appreciate that. And if you like and if you comment or whatever, it helps out in the algorithm. So that would be greatly appreciated as well. And of course, a massive shout out to everybody who keeps this show running over on Patreon. The link is in the video description box below if you'd like to support the show on Patreon. Also, thank you to everybody who keeps Crystal Kyle and Friends going as well. That's the Substack link below. Again, if you want to help out, you can do that. And also, for anybody who maybe doesn't like clicking on all the individual YouTube videos to watch the show, you now have the full show is now available in podcast form over on Spotify and most of the podcasting platforms. So anyway, check that out. All right, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it here. So let's start with this. The Pod Save America crew. Now, these are normally not my people. How would I describe Pod Save? Pod Save, so they all used to work for Obama, and I would say they're not sufficiently critical of the Democrats. I don't even know if they make the distinction that there used to be New Deal Democrats who were more in favor of social democracy, and that now the dominant strain in the Democratic Party is what we would call neoliberal Democrats, corporate Democrats. I don't even know if they make that distinction, but insofar as they do, they lean more on the side of being pro-centrism, corporatism, neoliberalism, and of course I think that's been the death knell of the Democratic Party. I think that it's a vapid, dead ideology. It concedes far too much to Ronald Reagan and the conservatives. But shockingly, I guess every now and then they have a little flash of like, hey, maybe there's some humanity and pragmatism and reason in there. And they definitely surprised me with this one because they end up critiquing the Congressional Progressive Caucus for that incredibly weaselly move they did, which is released a letter with 30 of them signing it saying, hey, we're pro-Ukraine, but also let's do negotiation and diplomacy to avoid nuclear war, and then retracting that letter. Here are the Pod Save America bros basically saying, bad idea, shouldn't have retracted that letter. Let's watch.
You make the right point that what Biden's saying is, I won't negotiate around the settlement that Ukraine has to accept without them. That doesn't mean we don't have things to talk to the Russians about. It just means Biden's not going to sit there and say, well, maybe you can keep this part of Ukraine and not that part of Ukraine. That's not going to happen. But to your point, if you don't create any space for kind of debate in the center here around this policy, you know where all the concerns about the war are going to go? They're going to go to where Kevin McCarthy took it, right?
Totally.
Which is like, hey, I'm getting uncomfortable here. There's nuclear threats. Let's cut off the Ukrainians, right?
It's a lot of money.
So,
Yep.
To some of you, like some of the Ukraine stands on Twitter or whatever who like just, pile on this stuff, you might be creating the outcome you don't want because by punishing anybody who says, let's have diplomacy, the only alternative to your position, is where Kevin McCarthy's going, which is like, hey, let's cut these, where Tucker Carlson is, basically.
Or, where Elon Musk. I mean, there's clearly a void of people.
There's a void of
and like
discussion.
Elon Musk is filling it, or that guy David Sachs, some like idiot tech investor, right-wing goober is filling it. It's like, why don't we have the CPC, the Congress, the progressive in the House fill it, or at least try.
Well, that would be a very healthy place to fill it.
Yeah.
So now I should also add, they spoke to Obama recently on their show. I think we covered one of the segments from it, probably one of the things that Obama said that I didn't like. But he also echoed this sentiment. And Obama's policy vis-a-vis Russia was a lot more on the side of negotiation, diplomacy, let's reduce tensions, the Cold War is over. There was that very famous moment between Mitt Romney and Obama back in the 2012 debate where Obama said to Romney, hey, the 1980s called, they want their foreign policy back. And certainly Russia has been more hawkish, bellicose, and imperialist than was predicted, but that doesn't mean you cannot talk and try to avert a worst case scenario, because those are the stakes when we talk about what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. So their point is, hey, look, if you leave this position, this lane wide open for people like Kevin McCarthy and Marjorie Taylor Greene to take this position, then they're effectively outflanking you on your left. But they're not really doing that for this specific reason. All of the rhetoric that I've seen come from them is cut off the weapons to Ukraine. Full stop. That's where they ended. Like, okay, we're not gonna do a blank check to Ukraine. Okay, look, I agree with that position, right? But what's missing from their position? They're not saying anything about negotiation and diplomacy. They just want to cut off the weapons to Ukraine, which means it's only a matter of time until Russia takes over all of Ukraine, or at the very least, certainly the eastern portion of Ukraine. So the real position that I think is the correct position for the lefties to take is peace deal is paramount. That comes first and foremost. That's the most important thing. And then also, you can reduce or eliminate the weapons to Ukraine. I told you guys from the very beginning, I was definitely in favor of the first few packages of weapons to Ukraine and support to Ukraine for the very simple reason that this was an illegal and offensive imperialist invasion by Russia against Ukraine. And so they deserve a right to have a fighting chance to protect their country. Now, where I differ, of course, is that doesn't mean a blank check. That doesn't mean, 16 packages later or whatever it is, $80 billion later, that, it's now heresy and pro-Putin to say, hey, let's cut the weapons off. No, I disagree with that. But again, I think the most important point to stress is I don't agree with the Tucker Carlson position or the Marjorie Taylor Greene position or the Kevin McCarthy position of just cut off weapons. No, it is peace deal and cut off weapons. Peace deal is the most important part. So again, the position of the Congressional Progressive Caucus in the letter that they took back was, let's make sure we do negotiation and diplomacy to try to find a way out of this. That's what they were saying. And by the way, they were super clear in that. They don't fully agree with me, because their position in that letter was like, we'll give Ukraine anything and everything they want in terms of weapons, but also let's talk. No, I think the correct position is honestly to marry the far-right position, the Tucker Carlson position effectively, with the Congressional Progressive Caucus position of negotiation, diplomacy, and let's cut off the weapons to try to de-escalate, avert this, find a way out. And look, it is very possible that if you do that, you can get some sort of a settlement that's bare minimum agreeable to both sides, and the world ends up much better as a result of it. That's very possible. But now it's also possible the opposite happens, and you make this peace agreement, and then Putin signs it, agrees to it, and then effectively ignores it and keeps taking more territory. And if that were to happen, then everybody who was screaming, oh my God, you're Neville Chamberlain, they were correct. But that's yet to be seen whether or not that is true. And by the way, even if that does turn out to be true, that, oh, we were Neville Chamberlain and we should have never negotiated in the first place, we should have never made a peace deal in the first place, well then, at least, the people who advocated for a peace agreement bought us into the 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it may be, before World War III. Because, make no mistake about it, these are the consequences of that, right? Like, if he goes back on an agreement and takes more territory, then I don't think there's going to be any way to stop the U.S. and Russia from escalating to a point of absolute crisis where we're talking about cataclysmic, apocalyptic, civilization-ending type events. I know that sounds hyperbolic, but it's really not when you're talking about, a World War III where now we're in the nuclear age. So, look, credit to the pod save guys, right? Because the argument they're making is like, don't get outflanked by these idiots on the far right. The position of that letter was the correct position, because they also pointed out in the letter, I think, things which virtually everybody except the biggest idiots in the country agrees to, which is, yes, Russia invaded Ukraine. Yes, Russia is being imperialist. This is an offensive invasion. This violates international law. To one extent or another, you could say what Russia is doing to Ukraine is very similar to what the U.S. did to Iraq. I think a lot of the reason why Putin did it is because there's, massive oil and natural gas wealth in Ukraine, and they found it in 2012 off the coast of Crimea, and would you look at that, in 2014, Putin took Crimea. So I think the oil and gas has a lot to do with it. I think it's effectively imperial ambition, because Putin even said in his speech he thinks Ukraine is a fake state. They never should have given away that territory in the first place. This is the stuff that he believes in. This is the stuff that he said. So I don't remember where I was going with that point, but bottom line is their argument is correct. Their argument is correct. Oh, I was talking about the CPC letter. They acknowledged all of that while then also saying, But for the sake of humanity and to avoid nuclear war and to avoid, a war that's dragged on for 5 years, 10 years, whatever it may be, with hundreds of thousands dead, perhaps, even if it just stays a conventional war, this is what we need to do. So you can acknowledge all the facts about the situation while also saying, let's try to find a way out. Let's not be crazy. And the sad thing is, and this is what the Pod Save guys are realizing, is that now, functionally, there is no difference in the Congressional Progressive Caucus position between theirs and a neocon's position. I mean, this is Bill Kristol, right? This is David Frum. This is their ideology. No talking, no negotiating ever. We just need to flat out defeat the enemy, whatever that means, and we're going to act like we live in a comic book world where it's pure good versus pure evil, and that's the end of the conversation, and, the just will prevail or whatever the fuck. And it's like, okay, we don't live in a movie, though. This is not a movie. This is real life. And the Pod Save guys are realizing this requires a hell of a lot more nuance than they're bringing to the table, and it was a cowardly move to back off and redact that letter. So, look, credit to the Pod Save guys. You can't say I'm not fair. These are guys who I would disagree with a lot, and it is like the competing vision for the Democratic Party, right? Like, they represent the status quo in a sense. They represent the continuation of Bill Clinton politics and Obama-style politics. And of course, my argument is, as well as Bernie Sanders' argument and many others, is like, let's return to a New Deal type Democratic Party, an FDR type Democratic Party. So these are guys who, in many ways, are like our biggest enemies, right? But you got to give credit where it's due, and they're right on this. They're right on this. You need to, I feel like I live in the twilight zone when you have a situation where even just the mild suggestion of negotiation and diplomacy is treated as insane. And it is. That is how it's treated. Because the only historical analogy people can possibly think of is Putin is Hitler. But that's not the only war that's ever happened. And it is possible you create a deal and this motherfucker is looking for a way out and he'll take it, right? That's the other thing. And a lot of people refuse to acknowledge that that's even a possibility. But it is. It is a possibility. The economy contracted. He conscripted 300,000 fighters who don't want to fucking go. You have the recruitment centers being shot up as we speak. Like, there's dissent in his inner circle. He probably fears he's going to get toppled or some shit too. He might be looking for a way out. And if that's the case, then you might actually find a way to create some sort of a deal which would work. Where he could do some bullshit face-saving thing to his own population, and the Ukrainians can sort of get back to business as usual. Get back to being not under the occupation of an imperialistic army, right? So, look, I hope that's the case. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it, but that's the path we need to go down, because this Twilight Zone shit of any talk of negotiation is insanity. I don't know, man. It's not good. If you want to see me and Crystal Ball interview legends like Noam Chomsky, Cornel West, and more, subscribe to Crystal, Kyle, and Friends on Substack. $5 a month gets you the video version a day early. Remember, we take 0 ad dollars for this podcast. Or you can sign up on Substack for free and get the audio version a day later. Link in the video description box below.